But what he was pointing out to me is that in many ways they've backed off, in the American Psychological Association, kind of backing off from looking at psychological origins of terrorism so much, because that's hard to do. That's extreme. We're not coming up with much there, right? So I think Dr. Alia was kind of pointing out. And as she was pointing out, we're looking at vulnerabilities. What makes people vulnerable to engaging in these aggressive acts or engaging in terrorist acts, whatever you want to call them, extreme violence? One is, again, a vulnerability, a perceived injustice done against you or your group, right? A perceived injustice. Timothy McVeigh, right? A perceived governmental injustice in Waco, Texas, and he held on to that. Anders Breivik, a perceived injustice by the Muslim community on the world, and he's lashing out. The young men in Boston, a perceived injustice, right, and they're lashing out. One, and this one, the psychodynamic and the cognitive behavioral people agree on, and this is a deep longing or a search for identity or meaning in life. Life's hard without meaning and purpose or a sense of identity. And so sometimes you can get a very clear meaning or identity when someone presents you an absolutist, black and white view of the world that will reduce the complexity of finding your identity. It's ready-made for you, right? With a bow on it. You can just take it, almost introject it, stick it inside yourself, and you don't have to go through the complexity. You don't have to go through what I call the Indiana Jones phenomenon. Any of you see Raiders of the Lost Ark? There's this wonderful scene where there's this character, Salah, who I think was an Egyptian or something, and Indiana Jones are on a train or a truck, you know, something, and it's out of control. And so Salah turns to Indiana Jones and says, what do we do next? He says, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go along, right? Many of us don't want to have to live with that kind of a choice. Erich Fromm wrote a book, Escape from Freedom, right? We don't know how to deal with freedom sometimes. And so we want a ready-made identity, and these people with engaging in black-white ideologies give you this ready-made ideology. Probably the most significant on the list is this deep desire to belong, to feel connected, and to affiliate with others. And in fact, when we're looking at, and this is not about de-radicalization, but when they've looked at de-radicalization programs throughout the world, except for one de-radicalization program in Saudi Arabia that I've been reading about, rather interesting, is that they have focused on changing a person's ideology rather than trying to realign affiliations. And yet, the deep desire to affiliate, is greater than ideological reasons for embracing things. We all want to feel connected. Plus, an ideology can be rather abstract. The stuff that I like, you know, that has no purpose for anything, really, except a doctorate in philosophy. The other one is desiring a spiritual mentor. It's estimated that, and these numbers are loose at best, Dr. Alia made a really good point of saying that 20% of the Muslim homegrown terrorists had a spiritual mentor, and that was a huge part of the motivation. And the other one that was brought up by Dr. Anwar was the appeal to the internet. The internet has become a major problem. I mean, as a therapist, sometimes I wish the internet had never been developed. I'm seeing so many marriages broken up because people get on Facebook. By the way, in our new DSM, the Bible that we use in mental health, internet addiction is going to be in there now. You can now collect insurance money by diagnosing somebody with an internet. Yay, okay? Yeah. While And while these websites may not be run by radical groups themselves, they can often be a tool for recruiting sympathizers to a radical cause or proliferating ideologies that someone can read all alone and maybe begin this process of radicalization. Traits of Muslim terrorist movements, and this is true of many of the others, but this one's beyond Islam, but this one for certain types of Muslim terrorists is something that we see in cults and we see in all kinds of groups, is this oversimplified bifurcation of the world into us versus them. We heard about it in summer camp, right? And it just happens all the time. We hear it in politics, those evil Republicans, those evil Democrats, those evil people that drink tea, all those kinds of things, okay? The second one is they believe that their truth is the absolute truth and that is sanctioned by authority. If it's sanctioned by religious authority, which some people call derivative authority, then you don't have to look at it critically. If God's behind it, who am I to investigate it, right? If this sheikh who knows everything, or this televangelist or whomever knows it all, why do I need to look at that, okay? And the other one is, not only is it an us versus them, but the them is after us. They want to get us. They want to destroy us, right? It's common for some of these movements, for example, to believe that there's this Zionist Christian conspiracy against them. And I've met with, some people who sometimes think that, and I'm going, there's really no conspiracy against you. The reality is we don't think about you that much until you show up on TV. But I often think that's kind of like paranoid, paranoids, is there's this belief that, that we're so important that that aliens and everybody else are following us, right? No, there's no Zionist Christians conspiracy, but once you have that belief, then confirmatory bias, right? You can comb the data on the internet and on the news and all of that, and it can be fit into that kind of black-white category. It reminds me of my daughters. I have 2 daughters. And they don't believe that my wife and I have a life outside them. That when they go out for the night, that we have nothing to do. When the reality is we high-five each other and go, freedom, right? We can dance, we can do whatever we want without you guys. The other one is that they tend to focus on hate, and they justify that hate by appealing to a peculiar and kind of idiosyncratic interpretation of the faith that's not in line with what Islam has preached throughout the centuries, right? These are rather interesting. Small groups of people with very idiosyncratic, black-white kind of ideology. I was actually, I married a woman from New Jersey, so pray for me. And so she's tough. Oh man, I don't even get me started. But I went to New Jersey, and I wanted to meet this group of Muslims who were Salafiyya. I don't know if you've heard that. They're kind of an ultra-Orthodox interpretation. And I went in there. They were very nice to let me come in to see them. And so I walk in, and there were curtains all over. And the woman did come out. I couldn't see her, though it was rather interesting. I mean, however you want to dress, you can dress. I mean, so she was completely covered, which is fine if you're into that. But her glasses were on the outside, which was a little different for me. But and she went, "Assalamu alaikum." Whoa. She had interpreted, the the notion that the voice is aura or seduction, so she talked to me in a really rough voice. Believe me, it was not a seductive voice. It was not seductive for me at all. And then the guy came out, and he had a thobe, you know, like a robe, and he had pants on under it, and his pants were like, I'm just going to, this is a show and tell. They were like this. Why? Because he had read in a hadith that that part of your pants or your clothing that was below your ankle would be burning in hell. Kind of, you know, it was against pridefulness, right? Pridefully showing that you could afford a long clothes, but he interpreted it quite peculiarly and literally, so take it up. He could have spent $3,000 for that pair of pants and been very prideful, but you know, he missed the meaning there because of this narrow, very weird interpretation of that, okay? Every religion has those kinds of things. NYPD Intelligence Division findings, and they've really looked at a lot of cases and have come up with some really interesting things. They've come up that while Al-Qaeda, which Dr. Alia had mentioned, has inspired homegrown terrorism in this region, and I think of Al-Qaeda as one of those small, you know, peculiar interpretations of a faith that have influence now because they've been quite wise in how they've used the internet and other social network media. But while that organization, you might not bump into an Al-Qaeda member, you may bump into someone who's been radicalized by that message, okay? And although Al-Qaeda may not be involved. The other thing that they found, which is very, very interesting, is that there's no useful profile to predict who will go through radicalization process ending up in potential violence. A person could begin the radicalization process and not end up engaging in violence, right? People can engage in violence and not go through a radicalization process too. And we were really hoping that there would be a profile so that you would know it exactly. It doesn't mean that we can't know some things, and so we can talk about that later, but NYPD was finding that most of the individuals that are engaged in these acts are not on law enforcement's radar because they appear to be normal. I mean, if they were on the sidewalk talking to Martians, you know, we could spot them easily. But often they blend in. And often that's what makes them attractive to groups that want to radicalize people, right? Have somebody that does blend in, that does act quite normally. NYPD found that an ideology that is proliferating in the US among some Muslims is what they call a jihadi Salafi interpretation of Islam. It's, again, an extreme minority interpretation of the expression of Islam. I happen to believe that one of the great antidotes to that are mosques in the United States, right? That are preaching moderate Islam. They're very clear. We do not accept that because ultimately these individuals hurt their community, hurt the Muslim community more than any other community. Many of the acts of violence are against fellow Muslims, right? And so my experience of Muslim community in the United States is that they're doing what they can to try to address this. On the other hand, Muslim organizations that are not Salafi sometimes can inadvertently spread literature because they haven't read through it, right? And so it's helpful for us to, or the Muslim community to look at that. Also, the internet can be a driver in the problem of radicalization.